This video is going to focus on rational numbers, and ordering them by finding equivalent fractions and decimals. You can actually order fractions and decimals by rewriting the fractions as equivalent decimals, or you can rewrite decimals as equivalent fractions to make it much easier to put in order, particularly when you're given fractions and decimals to order. Let's work on changing a fraction to a decimal. There's two ways that we can do this. When the fraction has a denominator that is a factor of 10, 100, or 1,000, it's much easier to change that fraction to a decimal. Why is that? Well, decimals have place values, and each place value is either a denominator of 10, 100, or 1,000. I'm sure you remember hearing tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. Let's see if we can change these fractions into fractions that have a denominator of 10, 100, or 1,000. And then we can easily change that to a decimal. Let's look at 2/4. Let's look at the denominator of 4. Is 4 a factor of 10? No. Is 4 a factor of 100? Yes. So I can make 2/4 equivalent to a certain amount of hundredths. And by doing that, I can see what number when multiplied by 4 gives me 100. Well, that's 25. So 4 times 25 is 100, and whatever I do to the denominator, I do to the numerator. So I'm actually multiplying 2/4 by 25 over 25, and 25 25ths is actually the number 1. And whenever we multiply a number by 1, we get the same number. It's the same with fractions. I'm essentially multiplying 2/4 by 25 25ths. So I'm going to have the same value, but because I'm multiplying a numerator and denominator, I'm going to have a different numerator and a different denominator, but it's going to have the same value. It's just going to be in different form. So 2 times 25 is 50. So 2/4 is equivalent to 50 over 100. Now 50 over 100, I can say 50 hundredths. And by saying that, I'm reading out the decimal place values. 50 hundredths. So 2/4 is equivalent to 0.50 or 50 hundredths. Let's look at 7 over 20. 7 20ths. The denominator is 20. Well, I know that 20 can be simplified to tenths, but the numerator is 7. That would be hard to divide by 2. So I think what I'm going to do is make it equivalent to something out of 100, because I know 20 times 5 is 100, and therefore 7 times 5 is 35. So 7 20ths is equivalent to 35 out of 100, and now it's easy for me to say that 7 20ths is equivalent to 35 hundredths as a decimal. All right, let's look at 3/5. Well, 5 is my denominator. I know 5 is a factor of 10, so I can change 3/5 into tenths. They will be equivalent. They will have the same value. 5 times 2 is 10, and 3 times 2 is 6. And 6 tenths can very easily be written as 0.6 or 6 tenths. Ooh, look at this challenge question. 3/15. I'm going to let you press pause on this video. I want you to think about, how could I change 3/15 into a decimal? 15 is not a factor of 10, 100, or 1,000. But there's another trick you can do. Did any of you think the same way that I did? When I saw 3/15, I saw that 3 and 15 have a common factor, and that's 3. So instead of multiplying each numerator and denominator by a factor, I decided to simplify 3/15 into 1/5, because I knew that a denominator of 5 could very easily be made equivalent to tenths. And in fact, it would be 2 tenths, and 2 tenths written as a decimal is 0.2. Now, when you have denominators that are not friendly factors of 100, there's something else we can do, and we need to use our knowledge of what a fraction really is. A fraction is a division problem, and when we see 1/8, that's like saying 1 divided by 8. And you can take your calculator out, or you can use long division, and you'll want to do 1 divided by 8 on your calculator, and you will see that that's equivalent to 125 thousandths. Same with 1/3. 1/3 is equivalent to saying 1 divided by 3. And 1 divided by 3 on my calculator, or if you just know that this is a benchmark fraction for you, you'll know that it's decimal point 333, and it continues on, so we put our line above 3 to demonstrate that this is a repeating decimal. Now with 2/9, 2 divided by 9 is equivalent to decimal point 22, and so on. It's also a repeating decimal. We're going to get more into this during our fractions unit, but this is just a reminder of how to change a fraction to a decimal in 2 different ways. Now, let's talk about changing a decimal back to a fraction. And I know you can all agree that changing a decimal to a fraction is much easier than changing a fraction to a decimal. Why is that? Well, when we see a decimal, we see place value. And when we see place value, we see denominators. For example, if we see decimal point 23, I can use this place value chart to help me read it. So I look at my number and I read it as though it's a whole number. I can read this as 23, and wherever the last digit is in, I read that place value. So this is 23 hundredths. And by reading it, I'm also saying the fraction itself. So this is 23 hundredths. And when I hear that hundredths, the THS at the end, I know that I'm dealing with a number less than a whole, so my fraction, the denominator would be 100. Let's try another one. Okay, let's look at this. 1 and 0.8. How do I read that? Well, I know I have one whole, and when I see a decimal point, I say and 1 and 8 hundredths. This is a mixed number, 1 and 8 hundredths. Now, if I want to make that number rational, because I'm pretty sure I can take that mixed number and make it into a fraction form where I just have one integer in the numerator and one in the denominator, I can use my knowledge of changing mixed numbers to fractions. 1 whole would be 100 100ths. And when I add that to my 8 100ths, I get 108 hundredths. So I've now written that as an improper fraction in rational number form. I also know the trick, and I can just do 100 times 1 plus 8. Some of you mentioned that in class. Now let's see if you can order these rational numbers. I have 67 hundredths, 1/2, and 1 2/5. Each one of these numbers can be written in fraction form, therefore I know they're rational. But now I need to put them in order. I need to order them, and let's order them from least to greatest. So why don't you press pause on this video and take a minute to order these 3 numbers. Use your knowledge of changing either the decimals to fractions or the fractions to decimals, because that will make it much easier for you to decide which one is greater than the other. Let's see how I decided to rewrite these numbers. I decided to change all my fractions and mixed numbers into decimals. I find that changing fractions to decimals is easier because I can use my knowledge of money when it comes to ordering decimals. So 0.67 or 67 hundredths is also like saying 67 cents. 1/2, I converted into 0.50 or 50 hundredths, which is like saying 50 cents. And then 1 2/5. I changed it from a mixed number into an improper fraction of 7/5, which I made into 14/10, and I knew that that was 1 4/10, or almost like $1.40. So I can easily order these now that I have changed them all into either all decimals or all fractions. I know that 50 cents is less than 67 cents, which is less than $1.40. And that's how I ordered my decimals. I hope this video was helpful in reminding you how to change decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals. Remember to watch this video as often as you'd like in order to help you.